Cool. So yeah, so what we're doing here, this is the end of one of our 10-week cycles. So we're doing a celebration, and it's always kind of a bonus week after 10 weeks. But in this case, I wanted to invite the other Conquer groups and some other people because this is the strongest group that I've ever seen. I've never seen a group where every single member made it through all 10 weeks. Every single one. Normally what happens, and I'm just being honest with you about when you're coaching a class, you get a few guys who really grab onto this, and then there's a lot of guys who struggle, but they're in the fight, you know. But what happens is after a few weeks, some people start to fall, and instead of leaning on each other, they isolate. And what happened in this class, for whatever reason, the right mix, people started leaning on each other. And when they would be about to fall, they would call someone, or they would reach out, or they would confess, or there was deliverance that happened. Because of that, people made it through the whole 10 weeks. And I think that's amazing, and I think it's a testament to what God really wants to see happen in everybody's life. Yeah, what's up?
I was pointing to God.
Oh, he's raising his hand while he's drinking. I'm like, am I supposed to count? Like, you're still going. You're doing it. So this is a celebration. We have a guest speaker here as just a treat for you guys, and I think there's going to be maybe some ministry time afterwards. But whatever happens.
Probably. We'll see.
So for those of you who don't know Putty, and I didn't know Putty before. I knew him from a distance because I knew who he was, and I had seen his videos, and I listened to interviews of him. But it's not too hard to stalk. You can find him. He's right there. Okay. He's right online. That's the website. You know, he's a doctor of theoretical physics. That's by trade, by training. You know. He's an author, he's a speaker, he ran the School of Kingdom Ministries, he does ministry across the globe. So we're really privileged to have someone like this. And what's funny is when I first met him, before I knew who he was, like I knew who he was, but I didn't realize I was bumped into him. It's kind of a God encounter. And I won't tell the whole story. I can tell it some other time maybe, or you're welcome to share it. But when I saw him, I was trying to figure out who these guys were praying for somebody randomly in a store. And I looked at him, and I looked at the other guy, and I was like, okay, are they Mormons? No, I don't think, because usually you see Mormons out. Are they Jehovah's Witness? No, I don't think that either. I thought they're kind of nerds. I think they're kind of nerdy. But he looks kind of built. And I remember thinking, like, what? I was like, are you trying to sugarcoat it? No, this is what I want to tell you something.
Okay, motivational speaking.
Yeah, exactly. No. I think this is a smaller group. Like, it's more fun. But I thought, I think he's kind of built. I bet he does like martial arts or something. And come to find out, Putty actually owned a martial arts studio.
I don't
so
like
that's a little thing you might not know
about
about it. But he's a very diverse guy. My discernment. Yeah, he's a pretty good discernment, right? Yeah, I didn't even know what that was at the time. So anyway, with all of that, one of the other things that you guys might not know about him is that the reason that we're here is because of Putty. When I had left the other church and, you know, the class had kind of wound down, I still wanted to do something with that. And Putty's the one who said, why don't you just start doing it? Just start teaching the class. And he helped us he gave us the funding to get started. He really blessed this. And that is the reason why we're here now. We started off in James' house. And then eventually moved over here. So James is another reason why we are here right now. But you guys might not know it, but we all have a debt of gratitude for Putty.
Thank you, Putty.
So, thank you, Putty. So, but with that said, he said he was happy to speak to us, and I guess take it away, my brother.
All right, I love to share. You know, interesting history. Many of you guys, I don't know you at all, you know, before tonight. This is weird, by the way. Can I stand here? I'm standing here.
You want to be a
it's hard for me to. Yeah, it's hard for me to stand. I mean, some of these guys know me. Tim's like, he can't do that. He's not gonna be able to stand.
I gotta move because I'm standing part of the.
I'm like, yeah, exactly. That's it. I gotta feel like I'm sort of a part of the.
I'm gonna stand here, man. Your butt's attractive.
So, part of the reason actually that I ran. Thanks, my butt's attractive. The reason I had a martial arts studio is because of Tim. What? So, Tim and I, the year before I got married, so my wife and I met, and I was a year ahead of her when I graduated. So she was doing her senior year at university when I was doing my first year in graduate school. She was up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I came down to Central Illinois for my graduate school program. And that first year, I lived with two other friends and Tim. Wow. And and we were actually roommates.
Mm-hmm. Share a room.
Shared a room. Yeah.
Ah, we rooming room.
Yeah.
Dorm roommates.
Yeah, we were dorm roommates. And he was doing this kung fu thing, and I was like, "That looks so cool, dude. Can I come with?" He's like, "Come on with." And then so I came and checked it out, and like 2 months later, I think you injured yourself or something, and you had to drop out, which was always sad. I wanted to do that together for longer than we got to, but and James and I we're basically born together, more or less. I've known James since I was 2.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no joke. And Tim was probably 8, maybe 9, 10 that we met.
Somewhere.
Probably 10, something like that.
Yeah. Junior high, grade school. Yeah.
So, anywho,
Man,
it's
yeah,
great
close
to be
family.
with old friends and new friends. All that to say
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Friends and new friends. And I want to say, like, I really, before we get to anything further here, I really believe in you guys and in what you're doing here. Dwayne, that was generous to give me a bit of credit to this. I feel like at best I gave a nudge. I think you did 99% of the work, but I gave that nudge truly genuinely because I think places like this and ministries like this are really important, like really important. And I think this kind of work is the kind of work that usually is undervalued, undercelebrated, and is deeply, deeply, deeply important. But like, for whatever reason, a lot of people just aren't willing to roll up their sleeves and get in the trenches with it. It's like, this group's great, and they're great, but it's like, let's be real, right? We know if we walk 5 minutes in any direction, we're going to run into 100 people who could be in this room, or more,
Oh, yeah.
And so, this is, I believe in this kind of ministry. And I also want to say, obviously I don't know you guys well, or a few guys I do know well, and most of you I don't know well. But I believe in what you're doing, and I believe in you guys and in this journey. This is the kind of area that's tough, man. It's called conquer for a reason, right? This is a fight. And there are some ministries that don't feel like they're 3 steps forward and 2.8 back. But that's what this one feels like. It's real, right? It's real. And the break feel good, but then the fallbacks feel terrible. They feel terrible. And not only is it this real hard battle where you just you fight for every inch, it feels like, but there's also just loads and loads of shame and condemnation around this too, right? There's so many ministries where you can be trying to get help and figure things out, and they don't come with near the sense of just all the stuff that surrounds this. Articulate it however you want. You guys know what I'm talking about. This is not a neutral feeling topic at all. And so to have that back and forth, surrounded by all that other complicated stuff, that's just a hard fight. It's a hard fight. And it's really easy in the midst of that, I think, to easily, it's always one step away. Maybe I'll put it that way. It's always one step away to begin to just kind of give in to resignation, or to give in to it's just always gonna be this way, it's always gonna whatever, right? And that's natural, right? I'm not saying that that's dumb to feel that way. That's totally legit to feel that way. It is, right? But I want to say that I actually believe you guys can make progress on this journey. I do. And my guess is he'll tell you that, but outside of him, you probably don't hear that as much as would be great. I believe in you guys, and I don't even know you, but I believe in you because I know that Jesus believes in you.
Amen.
I do. He believes in you guys, and he's really, really good at the really, really hard stuff. Right? He's good at the hard stuff. And I just want to say, I'm pumped to be here because I think what we're doing is important, and I believe in you guys. And so keep at it. Way to go this year with this cycle with the 10 and everybody hanging with it. Man, it's one of these things, you build momentum together, and you guys did it. So keep doing it, man. Like that's how it is. Band of brothers, right?
Amen.
Hoorah.
Thank you.
So, there's a little bit of Putty believes in you. I was thinking and really praying about what to share tonight. I didn't want to treat this lightly, and I didn't want to just like grab something that I talk about in other places. Because that just, honestly, it just kind of felt disingenuous. Like, this isn't what this group needs, right? Like, this isn't what's helpful here. And so I found myself thinking about it. I'm like, what is helpful and what's valuable? And you know, it was interesting. I just found myself thinking about, I'm like, you know, I don't know how much you guys have, whatever experience you have in churchy type stuff outside this group. My guess is there's some points of intersections in various places, right? And what I found myself thinking about was, if we're like legit honest with ourselves, right? I think there can be a lot that goes on in churchy stuff that feels to me like a lot of noise without a lot of heat. If that makes sense. Right? It's like, man, we're gonna like put a lot of effort in, we're gonna like say a lot of things that we know are the right things to say, we're gonna like do the things that, you know, we know are the things we should do or whatever, you know, like all that stuff. But if we're actually honest, isn't it true that it seems like a fair bit of that is kind of just like spinning our wheels? You know, it's like you put out a lot of effort, you go for it, and at the end of the day, it's like, well, maybe I moved forward some, but like not that much. I found myself thinking about that, and what I found myself thinking about is like, man, that doesn't work here. Like, it doesn't. Like, all that crud doesn't do anything here. Like, here it's either real or it's worthless. Right? It's true. Like, we don't have time for stuff that doesn't work in this fight. And so I found myself thinking about, like, what is actual change? And, like, how do we get actual change? Right? Like, the noise, it comes usually from a good place. You know, it's like people are trying to do things. I think they're even usually trying to do them for the right reason, right? It's like, I'm trying to do the churchy thing because I actually want to know God or actually want to see my life change or whatever. Like, I think it usually comes from a good place. But, like, why does change actually work sometimes? Because it actually does work sometimes, right? I mean, I'm sure Dwayne's told his story 1,000 times, right? But, like, that dude's not the dude he was in this area however long ago, you know? And I don't know all the details, but we've had enough conversation that I'm like, I know this has been a legit, real journey for you where you've actually changed, and it's not just you're managing the struggle anymore, right? That's usually the first part, and it's legit. That is a good first part, is that, like, I'm managing the struggle, because it's kind of like, man, you're not going to go anywhere while you keep drowning. Right? You're not going to build traction in your life if you keep stepping on landmines. Like, that's not going to happen. Okay? So you got to do that. And that's important. But it's also true that, like, that's a frustrating place to stay forever. Right? Like, it's hard. And I don't know about you guys, but, like, unless I can believe that real change is possible, it's hard for me to hang in there with just, like, managing the struggle. Right? So good job to any extent you are managing a struggle. Okay, first of all, let me say that, right? Because that's good. I'm not saying don't manage the struggle. Please manage the struggle. Don't step on the landmine. That's good, right? But as we do that, I want to be able to believe for more, and I'm sure you guys do too, right? So I wanted to talk about how does that actually work? And, you know, I found myself thinking this statement. I think this statement might be true. It's a little, it's not one that I like to hear because, you know, I'm like a pastor, but I think it's actually accurate, which is this. I think Jesus is good at change. It's just the church or Christians that are bad at it. Sadly true, right?
Your fault.
It's sadly true. Yeah, it's exactly. And I'm falling on my own sword in front of you guys here on this one, right? But Jesus does actually change people, doesn't he? Like he actually does. And so what I wanted to do is try to do the best I could with whatever it is I have to say, to try to just open that up a little bit and say, like, what does it mean that Jesus actually changes people? And like, how does that actually work a little bit? To try and kind of maybe get something concrete. So is that okay? Can we talk about that tonight? Does that work? Is that good? Okay.
With a little bit more pizza,
Yeah, and anyone needs to get pizza as we go, just go for it. Like I'm super low key. It's totally good. It's totally good. Did you say yeah?
I don't know if you have this planned already, but I have a perfect Bible verse that might help you out. 2 Corinthians 5:17.
2 Corinthians 5:17. That's a good one. Yeah. And we'll be
know it. All right.
Yeah. We'll
I'm trying to get know it all.
Yeah. Thank you. No, we're good. That's a good one. I like that one. In fact, I may or may not have that as a passcode to something. 2517.
It's to his phone.
So what I want to do is, what I always do. This is kind of how I approach it because I'm a scientist. So like I never stop being a scientist, right?
Science.
So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna back up a lot, and we're gonna ask this question: just what does it even mean that we can change? And what's Jesus doing with that? And then we're gonna zoom in really far, and we're gonna say, how do I actually partner with that change? Like, give me something practical, not just something like inspirational. Okay, can we do that? Does that sound good? So let's back way up. This is how I just can't help but do things. I'm a physicist still. So
How far should we go?
He didn't mean literally.
what? Oh, yeah. Oh, you can go further than that, man. So let me ask this question because I think when we think about change, I think what's important first is to even just ask this question, like, what does it mean that something changed? Like, what changed? And I think it's important to think with like biblical categories about that if we expect to be changed by Jesus, right?
Amen.
And so I want to grab. Do you guys usually read verses in here? I don't know how that usually works.
Sure.
I don't know how to not do that when I talk. It's like it's wired in there pretty deep. So we're not going to do tons and tons of verses, but I just like I can't not read the Bible. It will just feel weird to me to not read the Bible and talk about this kind of stuff. So I want to read a few verses here, and you can, if you want to read with me, I'm going to read the first like 6 verses, I think, of Revelation 21. And so you can read along if you want, or I'm happy to read. It's not a big deal if you don't want to swipe your way there, although I see, I think, everybody, which is cool. Revelation 21, we'll start at the first verse in the chapter. So what's going on here is this is the end of the book. Like, the next chapter's the literal last chapter, okay? So we're at the end of the story here, and what's happening is we're seeing, at this point, where God is bringing things. Like, in other words, we're looking at the sort of ultimate change that God's bringing to the world. and we see a little bit of a snapshot of it, and a little bit of a snapshot of a little bit how it works here. So I'll read it, and then I want to kind of like explain a few thoughts about it.
Revelation 1?
21. Revelation 21. Sorry, I wasn't clear about that, maybe.
No, just making sure.
Okay, so it says this. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people. And God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death will be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. And he who is seated on the throne said, Behold, I am making all things new. Also, he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. And he said to me, it's done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give from the spring of the water of life without payment. And there's a whole lot that continues. I would love to keep reading, but we'll kind of pause there. What's happening here is at the end of the biblical story, what we see is that what God is doing in the world is God is making like a new kind of the world. There's a lot that's described here that's actually kind of similar to our world. There's a heaven and there's an earth, right? There's a city. It talks about there's a spring, right? There's all kinds of stuff. There's like stuff that is very reminiscent of this world, but there's a lot of stuff that makes it clear we're not talking about the same kind of the world. It's like the same world, but a different kind of the same world. And that's what's being contemplated here. And so he's like, hey, so there was a first heaven and a first earth, but now there's a new heaven and a new earth. So it's like, it's still the same. There's still heaven and there's still earth, but it's new. It's not the same. And, God is going to come down. He's going to dwell. And, the new kind of the reality that God is going to make, like, it doesn't include tears or death or mourning or crying or pain or anything like that. That stuff, that exists in, like, this kind of world. But there's a kind of world that God is making, and God is making through Jesus, that is a different kind of world that doesn't include that stuff. Mm-hmm. And what's fascinating is that if you look at the language there, I don't know if you noticed it, but if you look at the language, what's going on is the language here bounces back and forth between stuff behind, stuff ahead, and stuff in the present. Mm-hmm. So it says this, it's like, I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down. That's like happening now. Jerusalem's happening now, right? Mm-hmm. And I heard a loud voice saying, behold, the dwelling God is with man. That's right now. He will dwell with them. That's ahead. Mm-hmm. He will wipe away these things. And then back to, I am making all things new, and then it's done. It's already happened. I am the Alpha. I am the Omega, right? So what's fascinating is this new world that God's making, as he's trying to describe, how does this new kind of world work? You can tell John is like, he's like trying to get his head around it, and he's like, well, it's ahead of us. Except it's behind us. but it is ahead of us, but it's also happening right now. But it's ahead of us, but it's behind us. Mm-hmm. He's like bouncing back and forth and trying to kind of figure out how to articulate all of this, right? Yeah. And what's happening here, right, is this is describing the world that Jesus is bringing into our world. The Bible always looked forward to a better future that God was going to create. That's actually been there since the Garden of Eden, before even sin. The Bible was telling a story about a better future that God was going to create. He says, hey, Adam and Eve, I put you in this garden, keep it, fill the earth and subdue it. The world could be better than it is now, even before there's sin in the picture, believe it or not. Isn't that crazy, right? Like, it's not sin that means there's a better future. It's the action of God that means that there's a better future. And sin's actually just a little speed bump along the way. So God has always been promising a better future. And what happens in Jesus is Jesus reveals the sort of shocking truth that the better future that God's bringing happens by resurrection entering into death. Jesus shows up, he's like, I'm king, I'm in charge, I'm the guy, I'm bringing the future, and he walks around releasing a better future for all kinds of people around him. And then what happens when he dies is he becomes the first one to go into that future.
Who's talking to Nissan Altima? Their hazards are on. Oh, that's me. I'll take care of it. Thanks, bro. Yeah, I have a good battery.
He has to go to work at this time.
Sure.
Nothing personal.
He's offended. I'm offended too. I'm doing my
like
best.
the old.
I'm so sorry.
He's gonna go get some tomatoes.
Right. Every once in a while, I'll do that, like in an event where somebody has to go to the bathroom or something. It's a big group. I'm sorry, I'm doing my best. I'm not very good at this. It makes me feel so awkward. I love it.
mean.
It's so mean.
It's
It's
so
kind of
funny.
too. So usually, if they're a friend, I'll do it. Jesus is the one. Jesus is the one who goes into that future in his death and in his resurrection. That's what's actually happening there. Jesus is described, he's the firstborn of all creation. He's the first one who goes into the new creation. Or they call him sometimes the firstborn of the dead. He's the first one who got the resurrection at the end of time, early. That's what happens in the tomb. Is the resurrection that we're all going to have, he already had. Here's what happened to you in Jesus' death and resurrection. And we never ask the question, what happened to Jesus in his death and resurrection? It's like, ooh, that doesn't feel good, but okay, that kind of is what it is, I guess.
I'll take the cut.
So Jesus is the one who becomes that future reality when he resurrects. And I think that's really important, and here's why it's important, okay? I don't know about you guys, but it's easy for me to imagine the future that God's bringing to the world as what happens is he obliterates everything down to individual atoms. And then he starts something new that has no resemblance to the life and the world that we presently have. Right? You guys ever think that thought? I think that thought. It's very natural. It's kind of a nuclear holocaust version of God. Yeah, it's a nuclear holocaust version of God bringing about the end of the story. But the problem with that is that Jesus is the one who's already gone there. And Jesus, his resurrected body is made of his crucified one. Ooh. He still has the holes. It's not that Jesus gets obliterated down to atoms and has no resemblance to who he was before. In fact, the things that happened to him on this life actually still somehow have a shape for him in eternity. So that transition, it is real. He does change, right? He can appear and disappear and walk through walls, and he's not the same. But that's exactly the point. He's a different kind of Jesus. It's not that his body has no connection to the body that it presently has. It's that his body is actually the same, filled with a different kind of stuff. Filled with the life of God. That's what it is that God is bringing the whole world into. And what we see in Jesus is because he's the one who's gone there totally already, what we see is it would be easy to think God's going to do all of that to all of creation at the same time. But it turns out that's not how it works. What Jesus shows us is that beautiful end that is coming, and it's that weird ahead of us, behind us thing, that actually lands at the personal level. Jesus is the singular person who's gone all the way to the end, while the rest of this creation obviously hasn't. Right? And so it's not that end just drops out and ends everything all the way at the same time. Instead, what's happening more is it's the end is constantly doing this, landing on each of us personally in different ways and different times. And it's playing out in the kind of way that Revelation is talking about, where it's some of that stuff has happened to us already. Some of that stuff we look forward to and isn't here yet. And some of that stuff's actually happening right now. And that's actually kind of the message that the New Testament ends on, which is that God is doing a wonderful, incredible thing where he's birthing a whole new world, and it's not all ahead of us. Some of it's behind us. Some of it's in our present, and yes, some of it's ahead of us. And we've been invited to be people that actually get to step into that, and like it came onto Jesus, it gets to come onto us. Now, the reason I go into all that, why are we going into all that? Putty, we didn't come here for some theology lesson. You told us we were going to talk about change. Okay? The reason I'm saying all that is I'm saying this. Real change is when the person that you're going to be gets deposited in the person you are now.
Wow.
That's what real change is. What's not real change is when the person I am doesn't get more of the person that's coming, so I keep trying to work as the person I am. That's when we work hard and do work hard. Like, do everything you got with what you got, right? But the hope of real change is actually the hope that, like, wait a minute, hold on. Like, there's a different kind of you that's coming into the world. And that different kind of you, like here it says, like, there's no more death, there's no more mourning, there's no more crying, there's no more pain, right? For the former things have passed away.
Hair?
With hair. You're gonna have hair, I think.
Oh, I can't wait.
I think it's Roger.
Look at his hair, man.
You can have it.
As it comes to this particular topic, here's the thing that's important to realize, is there is a kind of you coming into the world. Not a vaporizing of you down to atoms and you become something that bears no resemblance to who you are today. That's not it. There's a kind of you that Jesus is bringing into the world, and that different kind of you does not struggle with lust. That different kind of you does not wrestle with insecurities. Does not, like, look to cope when we get hit with one of the hard things in life, and so on and so on and so on. That kind of you, first thing I want to say is actually, I think what's so beautiful and so important for us to remember is that kind of you is actually your end point, regardless of how well you fight now. Okay? You're gonna be that kind of you for a long time. For the next handful of decades, we're working at how much of that kind of us we get now, and we're going to do that, but we don't do that thinking like, oh man, here's my window, and if I don't, then I don't know, whatever. It's like, actually, no, your destiny's actually fixed. For a very, 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 very long time, you're going to be that kind of you. But the awesome thing is that we actually get that kind of us, we get doses of it already. We don't have to wait to get parts of that kind of us to come to us. And what happens when that happens is we get a little bit of the person we're going to be for all eternity, we get it early. And that's what happens when real change happens. When we get a dose of like, oh my gosh, like I got a dose of who I'm going to be for all eternity with Jesus, and that struggle with lust that I used to have, I actually don't have that anymore. And it's not because I'm trying harder. It's because I've become a different kind of me in that little area. Does that make sense? This is from like the Bible point of view. This is real change. And when we see this, it starts to become clear, sadly, why a lot of church stuff is a lot of noise without a lot of heat. Because the challenge with the beautiful thing about this is it's like, oh, that's going to happen. Like, that's amazing. Like, that's my future. Like, that's your future. In fact, it's like it's inescapably your future. Okay? You can even push against it for another few decades, but you're going to get there. Like, it's going to happen to you. Okay? So that's great, right? But the hard thing about that is this. Is that you and I can't make ourselves into a different kind of person. Like, we have literally no capacity to change the kind of human being we are. It's not possible for us, which means it's something that has to come to us. It's something that has to come from God. It doesn't come from my activity, right? It doesn't come from my enthusiasm or my effort or any of that stuff. It's something that's got to come to me from Him. Because he's the one who ends the story. He's the one who makes all things new, right? Behold, I'm making all things new. That's what we read. So if you're going to get a dose of the new you and going to actually change, it's not going to happen because you did something. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have an aspect of partnership, which that's what we're going to talk about tonight. But I think what's really, really important is to be clear on the fundamental of this, which is that, like, we don't have the capability to make the new world. And we certainly don't have the capability to make the new us. So it's got to be something that the Lord does in us. It's got to be something the Lord does to us. He's the end bringer. We're not the end bringer. But there are, nevertheless, Jesus says a lot about, he never says, you guys bring the kingdom of God. But he does talk to people a lot about, here's how you're responding when God's doing something. And he tells, for example, these stories. These are the stories that are challenging and we kind of don't know what to do with. But he'll say stuff like this.
Proverbs.
He'll be like,
Parables, I mean.
parable teachings and teachings through parables. He'll say stuff like, someday the end's going to come. And when the end comes, it's going to be like 3 different servants who had 3 different amounts of money. And the ones who were faithful and stewarded well, they're going to get more. And the ones who didn't are actually going to lose what they had when the end arrives. Okay? Now, again, we often take that and we just throw that into the very, very end of time. Right? But what we just talked about here is that, this new world that God's creating, the end that God's bringing, it's not all ahead of us. Is it ahead of us? Yes, it's ahead of us. But it's also, confronting our reality today, right now. So what that means is there are going to be moments where God's going to come and there will be an option and an opportunity for you to receive the new you in a dose. But the ability for you to steward what you already have and openly receive what God's doing in the moment, that'll actually determine how much you get of what God's going to do.
Wow.
You can't make God do God's part. That's not in ours to do. God's going to do God's part. But we do position ourselves. And Jesus talks about that a lot. He's like, be a good servant. Be ready. Don't fall asleep. Right? Because in translating into this, right? Think about it. Imagine if I just make this real concrete. I don't understand the deep nuances of how God does these things in our lives, right? But some of you guys can point to clear moments when it's just like, I was on this path, I was doing this thing, I was in this place, and then God, and after that, it was fundamentally different somehow. Was it perfect? Probably wasn't perfect, but it was fundamentally different, right? Imagine, and just give yourself this thought. Think this thought with me. What if that was the day you decided you didn't want to steward, and you checked out? Right? That's actually that precious thing. Because the truth is aren't those things precious in our lives? Once that happens, I'm like, oh my gosh, God did something real for me. That's such a beautiful thing, right? If that's the day that or the 6 months that I'm just I don't know what I think about Jesus. I'm just checking out, right? Then that's the day when God shows up, and we're like, and we could have missed that instead of got that. I don't know what fraction of those we actually get. Right? So it's there's one where it did land, but turn around. Are there ones we've missed behind us? Probably. At least there are for me. I mean, maybe you guys don't have bad days and don't do that. So I know I do, right?
Plenty.
I got plenty, right? And so I want to do everything I can to position myself to get every bit of what God does. So what does that look like? What does that look like? Well, I want to talk a little bit. So that's real change. That's what real change is. That's how real change happens in our lives. How do we position ourselves for that? Knowing we can't make it happen, but what's our job to put ourselves in the place of being square in the middle of when God shows up and dialed in so we get everything we can out, right?
Wash me with your blessing.
Yeah, right? Exactly. That's it, right? Okay, I want to talk just a little bit about some Bible terms real quick. And I want to take those Bible terms and I want to move them out of the space of, here we go. Got an alarm reminding me to make coffee. I do cold brew, so I have to make it at night. The night before.
Fancy.
Yeah. Not fancy. Actually, just quicker. I want to talk about the idea, the idea in the Bible that's called grace. Grace is one of these religious-y words, right? And I'm sure you've heard like a zillion sermons on it. And I already feel more bored having heard that word come out of my mouth. I'm just gonna level with you guys, right? I do.
I feel the people.
But grace is actually an important thought, and it's a super important thought in this conversation. Okay, but I'm not using this word probably the way that we're used to hearing this word in the church. The way we're used to hearing this word in this church is grace that is sort of like connected to some idea of forgiveness or something like that. Mm-hmm. Like you get forgiven because there's grace, and maybe you shouldn't be or whatever, but you've gotten forgiven. Okay, that's a fair use of the term, and the Bible uses that term in places. But that's not the only way that the Bible uses the word grace. The Bible uses the word grace to talk about a bunch of different things. And one of them, it comes up